Hey, Rick Boy. Hi. Now we are real. Hello, Ray.
Okay. Okay. Hello, Scott.
Thanks for being our head juror for Potomac
Yeah,
Valley this year. Um,
it's my pleasure.
I was just while we were waiting for the Zoom, I was, going back through the websites of the other jurors, and my gosh, what a body of work amongst that group. I could spend hours just looking at all of their different projects. So, how did you
Yeah.
assemble that crew?
Well, I always enjoy um, jurying awards programs or being part of a jury for awards programs. I feel like the conversation among the jurors is just as important as the work that you're reviewing. And so I tried to very deliberately select people that had a diversity of practice and background. And I think one of the requests from you was that they were maybe mostly from my part of the world, which is Seattle and Puget Sound. Um, so I asked my longtime friend Ann Schupp from Malum Architects, who uh, was the recipient of the AIA Seattle Gold Medal and has been the chair of the AIA National Committee on Design. So very active in AIA and very um, has had a long career kind of in, primarily doing institutional and cultural projects. I asked my friend Ruth Baleko from the Miller Hall Partnership. Ruth and I have kind of come up in architecture together, and our firms have always been kind of friends and friendly competitors, peers, if you will. And I served on an AIA committee here in Seattle with her, and just always appreciated her viewpoint and focus. Let's see, Eric Logan from Jackson, Wyoming, I suppose is the one maybe a little furthest to the east. But Eric and I have known one another about 25 years from when we started working in Jackson on the Grand Teton National Park Visitor Center, which is one of my kind of favorite projects, a sort of seminal project, not just for me, but for our practice. And I got to know Eric through that process. He has worked in Jackson for a long time and was one of the early supporters of our design and kind of cheerleaders, if you will. And so we've gotten to know each other over the ensuing years, and I really respect him and his body of work. And I was also wanting to include someone who was maybe earlier in their career. And so I had met Alyssa Mitchell on a graduate student review at the University of Washington a few months ago, and really appreciated her viewpoint and what she had to contribute to the conversation at the UW, which was a more academic review, but thought that her being recently licensed and more kind of on the upward trajectory of her career was kind of a nice balance to some of us who have been doing this a little longer.
Oh, that's absolutely true. It's great that you got all those folks together. Yeah. And so what were kind of your logistics and your process that you went through?
Well, for good or bad, we followed the prompts from AIA Potomac Valley fairly closely, which is that we all reviewed all the submissions prior to coming together for our deliberations. Each reviewed them all individually and ranked them. And my own process is that when I do that, it helps me to make a few notes about each one. So a reason why I may have ranked one higher or ranked another lower, or something that stood out to me as being very distinctive about the project. I've been involved with other awards programs where there have been hundreds of submissions. So in order to keep them all sort of straight in your mind, it's helpful to have the kind of little bit of a written note about each project, or something that strikes me as being distinctive or special about each one. And I think each of us did that more or less the same way. Each of the jurors for this program did that more or less the same way. So we all completed that and then came together here in Seattle in our office here and spent the afternoon kind of using the summary sheet that the AIA kind folks at AIA Potomac Valley prepared for us as a starting point. And what I've learned from other jury programs is that when you do this process, and they're ranked according to, how each person rated them, there will always be a project that might be outside of that. And so I always like to leave time at the end for a project that maybe someone found to be really compelling that didn't maybe rise to the top in the rankings, and give everyone the latitude and the leeway to talk about what they saw in it or why they thought it might have merit. Because everything isn't completely a linear process. And so it's kind of nice to consider projects that might not have caught your eye or might not have been very highly ranked upon first review, and to have the opportunity to have the discussion with the group in person was really helpful.
Yeah, it's pretty important to try to balance the math with the reality.
That's exactly right.
But
yeah,
because there's some people are concerned about that pre-scoring, and if I you got these three criteria, and if I do poorly on one, does that mean I'm out? And we try to assure folks that you guys look at it holistically.
We do, and I think it's we did go through the entire list. I think that's important to say, that we didn't just, when we were in person, we didn't just review the top 10 or top 15 or top 20. We did go through the entire list together. And what I always think is interesting about that conversation is when one juror or more has it a project ranked very highly, and then others have it ranked low, and that there's a real contrast. And that's what tends to provoke the most interesting conversations, where there's a strong, the projects where we all agree, in some ways that's a more straightforward conversation. Whereas I think when you have to articulate a logic or reasoning of why you feel a project is noteworthy, that's really where the kind of fun conversations happen, because I think it forces you to be really clear and really, really articulate about the reasons why you think it is worthy or special in some way.
So what'd you learn from each other while you went through this?
Well, one of the things that I think we all came away with was that the work as a whole is excellent that was submitted. I mean, I think it stands against other programs. The body of work that was submitted from the region, from AIA Potomac Valley, was as strong as any that I've seen in other jury programs, other AIA awards programs. So I think that's something to be very proud of, that the architects practicing in the region, the Potomac Valley region, are doing excellent work. I think something that we talked about quite a bit was using the AIA framework for design excellence as a measure. And there were some projects that took that very seriously. And then there were some entries that simply cut and pasted the text from their general description into different parts of the framework and didn't provide more data or more insight or more information to us. And we, at least in the folks who are practicing in Seattle, have adopted the framework for design excellence in our firms and our practices, and also in our awards program. So we take that very seriously. And I would say I would encourage the firms and architects practicing in the Potomac Valley to take that process and those prompts very seriously, and provide as much of the requested information as possible and as detailed of information as possible. I think there were a number of entries where the language was maybe less specific, particularly around energy use or water use, water efficiency. So some of the metrics that we would have liked to have seen were, simply not available, not included. And I think that's something that we'd like to encourage everybody to take seriously, not only in the awards, but when you're designing the project.
Well, so I mean, it's been a controversial issue, that we've been grappling with for a few years.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and in part because about half of our architects, or maybe half the projects, I'm not sure which it is, but a lot of our work is firms doing smaller scale work, whether it's small
Mhm.
commercial or residential.
Yes.
And the framework is beautiful for like a university project or a
Mhm.
governmental
Mhm.
recreation center where you've already got sustainability consultants, you have to meet certain green rating programs, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of overhead analysis going on in the project and a lot of funding pushing that green envelope. And we also have some very sophisticated clients who are trying to push that green envelope. On the other hand, many architects are doing great work where they don't have that scale or that infrastructure. So how do you
Mhm.
grapple with that when you're, let's just say you're doing a shoe store, renovation, and you don't have data about your energy. So what
Mhm.
are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the list of projects that we identified as winners, or that we selected as winners, because I think there's a great deal of diversity and range in them. And um, I would say in the smaller projects that were more modest in scale or that might be renovations, um, we still found a clear articulation of the values that they use to guide them in the design process. And so even if perhaps you don't have data or metrics on um, energy, for instance, there might be a statement on um, improving the building envelope through a certain type of insulation. So even though you might not have data on the energy use or EUI, the effort to improve building performance through adding more, a more a higher performance building envelope through insulation or any number of things, triple glazed windows, whatever it might be, that like leads us to believe that there's a series of values there. So even though the metrics might not be included, there's still a noteworthy effort towards addressing the framework. And I think that's really something we would encourage everybody to do, is be specific about the things that you are doing so that it's easy not easy, but that it's apparent as we're looking through the submission.
That makes sense. So how has Bohlin Cywinski Jackson integrated the framework into its internal process outside of awards?
Um, that's a great question.
Oh, you said you had.
we have, as has Malem and the Miller Hall Partnership, the other firms that I mentioned. We do a check-in in every phase of the project, every phase of design, and we measure against what our assumptions were when we started the project. So it isn't something that we just do in schematic design, or we just do in design development, or we only do when we're doing construction documents. We do a check-in, and we have a project dashboard at every phase of design, and that has helped keep us accountable. I think for those of us who have been around a long time, I think the process of design has shifted a little bit, and I think that's a good thing, because it isn't totally about making, form making as the primary, generator of the architecture, but there's more study, more testing, more evaluation using these kind of new tools. And I think that's a good thing.
And so the body of entries that you got, uh,
Yes.
which what made some projects other, obviously there's projects that clearly are stellar and those rise to
Mhm.
the top of their own merits. Of
Yes.
the projects that maybe get lost in the middle, what helped some of those stand out to you, or maybe what was missing on some of them that you said, gee, I can't vote for it because I don't know something.
To use a positive example, the projects that demonstrated um, a thoughtful approach at multiple scales of design were those that stood out very quickly. So, as an example, those that had a planning or urban design response that showed how that influenced the building massing, that showed how that influenced the floor plan, that showed how that influenced the materials that were chosen, that then showed how that might have influenced the detailing or climatic response, that showed how that benefited the occupants, that you could see the thoughts and the care at each phase was something that was almost instantly recognizable in several projects. For those that were a little quieter or maybe didn't exhibit that right away, um, the careful reading of the framework, because there's a general description that was included with each entry, but then the framework was a way to see what other things might have been addressed in the design or as part of the mission or values of the project. um, where I would say that some projects were in the middle, so to speak, were those where one of us had a certain interpretation and another person had a different interpretation of it. So that led to in some cases, some spirited debate, which I thought was healthy. Um, a lot of times we just wish for more information. The comment would be, boy, I would have loved to have seen another image of X, or did they really show all sides of the building? It looked like maybe they only showed three sides, and I wonder what the fourth side looks like, or more of the context. I would say the projects that we found to be really compelling were those that included, dialed back to the macro scale as well as to the micro, where you could see the building in its context and not just with a little bit of each neighbor, but where you could see it within a street or within a landscape. Because I think, you know, um, the experiential qualities of architecture are something that we find ourselves really drawn to, and it is one experience to walk through the front door and through the interior spaces, but it's another to see it in the larger context. So that was something that we appreciated about the projects that were selected, and in some cases where something wasn't selected, we wished for more, or wished for maybe a greater diversity in the materials that were presented, so we could see and understand more of the project.
That makes sense. Um, in the audience at the award ceremony, there'll obviously be the architects and the design teams, often the
Yes.
consultants, sometimes the contractors and
Yes.
clients. Um, so I don't know if there's anything in general that you would like to say to that broader audience as a judge.
Well, may I think about it for a second? I
Absolutely.
um
Yeah,
you know
we can
I
come
I
back to
go
that.
back to one of my earlier comments, which is that there was, as a body of work, there was an excellence to the submissions. And I think that's something for the building community there architect, builder, client, consultants to be very proud of, and to continue to press on the aspects of architecture and our profession that could be improved. And so we talked a little bit about sustainability. We talked a little bit about the framework for excellence. I think something that was noticed, and again, the projects that were selected tended to have a little bit more of the buildings in use. We are all visual people, and we love a good photograph. I think there were many submissions that could have been improved by the inclusion of seeing the spaces at work, or seeing the spaces inhabited or utilized fully. And I think that's something that we all try to remember. Most buildings are for people, and making spaces for people to live in, to work in, to visit, to share. And I think the more that you can convey that in the submissions, the better, more successful they will be.
So you yourself have had some great clients, including one that bought you lunch today.
Yes.
What if you're a client, what do you think clients can do, not just to get their buildings in on time and on budget and meeting their needs, but to elevate the architecture? What distinguishes the same architect working for a great client versus a moderate client, and how does that impact the work?
Wow, that's a good question, Scott. I always describe the architect client or client architect relationship as being similar to any relationship that you might have, and finding the right person, the right connection, the right attitude, the right synergy between client and architect is really important. I think listening is vital on both sides. We had a client once who was a orthopedic surgeon, and he said to us, we were talking about a particular aspect of the project, and he said, "Well, I'm trusting you to do this." He said, "In my line of work, I wouldn't want someone that I was operating on to tell me how to do the surgery." So, that was an interesting comment. I hadn't necessarily heard that from a client before. There was a kind of, they understood why it was important to hire a professional and then to listen to them. It doesn't mean you don't get an opinion, but I think it means that you are drawn to a person or a firm or a body of work for a reason, and being able to articulate that and also listen to and work with that person is really important on both sides. I think architects wouldn't be serving their clients well if they weren't listening to them as well. So
that's great. Now, you and I both went to Virginia Tech. How did you
yes.
end up out in Seattle?
How did I end up in Seattle?
Yeah.
Well, I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and our firm started in Pennsylvania many years ago in the mid 1960s. And I joined the Pittsburgh office in the mid 1990s when we were actually working on two projects at the University of Washington here in Seattle. And it's a little bit of a long story, Scott, which I won't go into in great detail, but I had a friend who was working at Bohlin Cywinski Jackson's Pittsburgh office who had recommended me, even though I was more interested in working in Chicago, and I had plans and a job offer in Chicago. The project opportunity and the firm's environment and design philosophy was something that resonated with me really deeply. And so I kind of put those plans to, go to Chicago on hold, and took took the position at Bohlin Cywinski Jackson in Pittsburgh instead. And that, single decision kind of changed the course of my career and my life. So later on, I relocated to Seattle, and we had a small office here that was really, I think I was the seventh person in the office. And what interested me about that is that I would be part of something that was still evolving. Our Pennsylvania offices were 35 people each and had, been established for a long time. And I think there was a very established hierarchy. Whereas the office here, because of the size and because of the project opportunities that we were getting, was really still evolving. And that was interesting to me. That I felt that I might be given more responsibility and get more experience sooner.
So how's your office structured and what's your role in it?
Well, I'm the principal here in the Seattle office. So I lead the office, both in design and business development and all aspects of leading the office. I like to say that we don't really have a hierarchy like a pyramid. It's more like a pancake with a hump in the middle. The design process is open to all members of the project team, and we believe that anyone can have a good idea. And so it isn't just up to the principal or to the project manager or senior person working on the project to generate ideas. That can come from anyone. So we include everyone on the project team in design review, design conversations, and design jams, we call them. So that's really important, really critical, I think, in developing work that feels kind of uniquely suited to its own particular circumstance, and that also isn't just the result of one particular person.
So just zooming out a little bit, maybe at your firm or just more broadly in the field, what do you think are some of the profession's bigger challenges right now?
Well, I think the biggest challenge facing all of us, whether we're in this profession or not, is climate change. And I appreciate the AIA's efforts to quantify and qualify how we're going to address that moving forward. But it is something that that in particular, young architects are very interested in, and they're interested in us being held accountable to those things. So how our buildings perform and how they will perform over time, and how we can increase performance and continually improve is something that we try to do in our work. And certainly I see in other architects that we admire, becoming more proficient in those skills and in that research, and also more proficient in how buildings are designed and delivered. I think it isn't just, as you know, it isn't just up to us. There are builders and consultants and clients involved in who I think should embrace those goals as well. Hopefully will embrace those goals. But I think that is really a huge challenge. I think maybe the second thing that occurs to me is just that the costs of construction continue to increase, and how we address that as a profession and as a community is something that is of vital importance. It's getting more expensive to build, and the investment, the return on investment, the financial implications of building are enormous, and I think we play a big role in that. So how we address that is I think quite telling as well.
To me, it's beginning to feel a little bit like education, and that it's always getting more expensive, and everyone complains about it, but everything gets more expensive. But it seems like and I haven't seen the studies, but it seems relative to our per capita income or whatever, buildings cost more than they used to. even for the
Yes.
same caliber of building. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and why, what are the drivers behind that? It's tough to pin down.
I think
But
one other thing I would
implications
say,
are huge, right?
I spoke about two kind of technical things, somewhat technical, but I also one of the many things that I learned from Peter Bohlin, who was an exceptional mentor, is the connection of architecture, or the role that architecture plays in connecting people to places, and how um, how certain buildings can be quite touching and can connect you to um, the particular place where they're located, can connect you perhaps to other people. And I would say I wouldn't want to lose those aspects of architecture and design in the um, interest of other perhaps performative metrics. I know that as part of the living building challenge, there's the biophilia aspect, but I don't know that is complete, that completely covers all the aspects of how we as humans interact with and experience architecture. So what you touch, how you see, where the how light enters a building, all of these things that affect us in very human ways that aren't obviously easily measured all the time, I think are things that we need to keep in mind as we try to make better and better buildings. So I wouldn't want to lose those aspects of what we do as architects and how we think about buildings and spaces. I think it's an and, not an or.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's almost impossible to do. But as the demands on buildings performance increase and the cost constraints tighten, it almost becomes more important that at least certain buildings take on an even greater value in their
Yes.
psychological impact
Yes.
on the public, because they're now so highly valuable. And if they're not beloved and inspirational, you've spent all this money and then you don't love it. And
That reminds me of a saying we have in our firm, which is the most sustainable thing that you can do is make a building that people love, because then they will be inspired to take care of it for a really long time. And that is really the most sustainable thing. Maintain it and love it for a very long time. So the durability and the flexibility over the life of the building is something that we talk about and think about quite a bit. So I appreciate that you said beloved. That's important.
so what are you working on now?
Oh boy.
Project.
um, we are fortunate in our firm to have a really broad range of work, and we're in 5 locations across the US. So each office has a slightly different focus, but we all appreciate the mix and the diversity of projects. So if we were speaking just about Seattle, we are working on a residential high rise in Honolulu. I am working on an off the grid home on a lake in British Columbia that is a water access only, totally off the grid building, which I'm really excited about. We have a new fire station for the city of Bellevue that is under construction right now, which has not only an emergency response component, but a resiliency component. And that is going to be at least LEED Gold, we hope LEED Platinum. So we're very excited about that. First of 2 that we're doing in the city of Bellevue. And we are also working on several extraordinary private residences in places like Whistler, British Columbia, Oahu, Hawaii, Jackson, Wyoming, and let's see, rural Ontario in Canada.
Well, I envy that blend.
Yeah.
Good for you for your
Yeah.
marketing skills there.
Yeah. Well, it's always been part of our firm's DNA to pursue, multiple types of projects, and it's sometimes I say it isn't necessarily the most efficient or profitable way to run a practice because you always feel a little bit like you're on the steep part of the learning curve. But it does inspire a lot of conversation and collaboration and research as we kind of delve into different building types and the very nature of the special nature of each one. And so I think that's something that we really enjoy, but we recognize that there's a that there's a flip side to that.
Right. That's great. Well, my brother-in-law lives in Bellevue, so I'll be out there. We're
Very
actually
good.
doing a house renovation for him there. So I'll be
Oh,
out there in
good.
a little while. I'll try to swing by your office or something.
Please, you'd be welcome at any time. I'd love to show you around. And you can see a little bit behind me that we still build a lot of physical models. That's a really important part to our design process. And so we have a model shop here with a laser cutter and 3D printers, and that's a huge part of our process is building physical models, and we really really see that as a kind of irreplaceable thing. The computer and Revit is a very powerful tool, and we rely on those as well. But we found clients really respond very well to models at any scale and any material. That's something that to be able to touch it or get your head down and peer inside it is something that is unbelievably effective.
Well, that's great. Any other closing thoughts you'd like to add? I don't have any other questions.
I just want to express some gratitude to you for extending the invitation in the first place, and also to the excellent staff at AIA Potomac Valley who were so organized and efficient with providing us with all the information and clear instructions on how to access the viewing portals, et cetera. Just really appreciate that support and the attention and the persistence. But it was a wonderful experience for all of us. And I think we all came away from that process at the end of the day feeling energized by the conversation and really appreciative of the quality of the work and the opportunity to be able to have the chance to come together as a group of professionals and talk about it. So thank you for giving us that opportunity, and thank you for the support all along the way.
Well, thanks for your insights and your efforts on this. It's been wonderful. So
yeah, great. I'm glad. And I'm sorry I can't be there. I in person, I always like to be there and see the reaction on the winners' faces and be able to talk to them a little bit about their projects. So I'm envious that you all will have a chance to do that, but hopefully there will be a great celebration, and we look forward to seeing some photos and hearing a little bit more about it.
perfect. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.